In October of 1968, on the gravel lot outside the Arden County Farmers Co-op Hall in central Illinois, Clyde Tibbetts stepped down from the running board of his 1962 Ford F-100 with a folded 1948 USDA soil conservation pamphlet in his right hand and walked toward the lit doorway alone. He was 64 years old. He had been farming his 240 acres of bottomland on County Road 14 for 38 years. The pamphlet in his hand had belonged to his father, Asa Tibbetts, who had died in 1953, and inside the back-end paper, in a careful pencil script, his father had written one line that Clyde had been reading and rereading since the spring. Stubble standing through winter is topsoil saved through April. The annual stubble burning vote was at 7. Every farmer in Arden County was inside, and the air on the lot smelled of diesel and burnt corn husks because 2 of them had already lit their fall residue on the way over. Inside, Dale Brockenshaw stood at the front podium with a wooden gavel in his right hand and a clipboard in his left. He was 39 years old, the youngest co-op chairman the county had elected in 50 years, and he was clean-shaven with neatly combed brown hair, a dark wool sport coat over a blue button-down buttoned to the throat, tan slacks, and brown leather Oxford shoes. He had inherited 600 acres from his father in 1965 and had taken on a $48,000 operating note at First Farmers Bank in Cooperton in February. He had a great deal of cash grain to make and not a single year to wait. "All right, gentlemen," Dale said, and tapped the gavel. "The seasonal vote. Burn in or plow under, show of hands." The hall held 71 farmers that October night. Burn in cleared a field for an early winter wheat planting and gave you a cleaner seed bed and roughly $4 an acre cleaner price at the elevator on next year's grain. Plow under cost more in diesel but kept some organic matter in the upper 4 inches, and Dale himself preferred it. Either way, the stubble came down. That was the unwritten law in Arden County and had been since 1928. Cash grain country burnt or plowed. Cash grain country did not leave a field standing. A field full of dead stalks paid no banker. Dale called for hands. 41 men raised them for plow under. 29 raised them for burn in. That made 70. Dale counted twice and looked up. 70 of 71. Who's missing a vote? In the back row, against the rough-sawn pine paneling, Clyde Tibbetts stood up. He did not raise his hand. He did not unfold his arms across his chest. He took one slow step forward into the cool overhead fluorescent light, and he held the folded pamphlet in front of him in his left hand, and he spoke once, in the calm, low voice of a man who had thought about a sentence for 9 months before he said it. "I'll be leaving mine standing this year." The hall went quiet for the time it took a man to draw one breath. Then Dale Brockenshaw laughed. "Standing?" Dale said. He set the gavel down. "Clyde, a field full of dead stalks is a field of nothing. There is no buyer in the state of Illinois for last year's wheat stubble. You'll get $4 an acre less at the elevator on next year's grain. You'll lose the early planting window. You'll be the one farm in this county sitting under 8 inches of rotted straw come April. That is not a strategy. That is sloth dressed up in a coat." Clyde Tibbetts stood at the back row and said nothing. He looked at the folded pamphlet in his hand. His father had walked these same boards in 1937 and had voted plow under every fall of his life, and at the end of his life, at 71, had told his son in the upstairs bedroom of the farmhouse on the night he died that he had been wrong about it. He had told his son that he had read the pamphlet too late. The pamphlet was dated 1948. His father had bought it at a feed store rack in Cooperton for 25 cents in the spring of 1949, had read it once, had set it on a shelf, and had not opened it again until the autumn of 1952, the year before he died. Clyde Tibbets had read it for the first time in February of 1968. He had read it 19 times since. He did not answer Dale Brockenshaw. He nodded once at the chairman, the way a man nods at weather he cannot change, and he sat back down. The vote was recorded, 70 of 71. One abstention, one man, in the language of the co-op record book, leaving Stubble standing. The men around him did not look at him. Earl Forsberg, a neighbor of 40 years, leaned across the bench and said, in a low voice, that he hoped Clyde knew what he was doing. Clyde said he hoped so too. Then he walked out into the gravel lot and drove home in the F-100 with the pamphlet on the bench seat beside him and 240 acres of his own back 40, standing untouched in the dark. The first winter, the wind came down from the northwest, the way it always came down from the northwest in central Illinois, and it found the plowed underfields of Arden County, and it lifted a measurable amount of their topsoil into the sky. Clyde Tibbets walked his fence line on the morning of January 14, 1969, in sub-zero air, and he counted 17 distinct dust drifts along the western fences of the 4 farms that bordered his. On his own back 40, the 8-inch standing winter wheat stubble caught the snow and held it. The drifts on his ground were even. The wind cut over the top of the stalks and did not touch the soil. He noted the count in the small, greasy pocket notebook he carried in his chest pocket in the same pencil his father had used. 17 drifts west. None on the back 40. January 14th, 1969. Below it, he wrote one more line. Pamphlet pages 6 to 7, stalks slow the wind. He closed the notebook and walked back to the house through snow that came up over his boot tops. That spring the planting was harder. The disc cut through 8 inches of standing residue, and it was slow work. And Clyde Tibbets sat on the seat of his John Deere 4020 and ate his lunch out of a tin pail and did not speak to anyone for 6 straight days. He had to grind the disc blades down twice that April because the residue dulled them faster than open ground would. He used 14% more diesel than the county average for the same acreage. He planted 1968's standing wheat ground into corn. The yield that fall was 8 bushels per acre below the county average. The elevator paid him $3.80 less per acre than they paid Dale Brockenshaw. He took the loss and said nothing. In 1970, he did it again. The stubble stood through the winter. The dust did not lift from his ground. The yield in 1970 came in 5 bushels below county average. The loss narrowed. In 1971, the loss narrowed again. By 1973, his corn was matching county average. By 1976, his corn was 3 bushels above county average. By 1980, his corn was 7 bushels above county average, and he was selling at a premium because his elevator manager had figured out that Clyde's grain came out of ground with twice the moisture-holding capacity of the rest of the county, and it carried through dry Augusts when the rest of the county's corn died standing. In the summer of 1976, in the dry July that broke the back of 3 farms in Arden County, the Cooperton Elevator's grain buyer, a man named Carl Bredal, who had laughed harder than most at the 1968 vote, pulled Clyde Tibbetts aside on the loading platform with a clipboard and asked him in a low voice why his July moisture test on the previous fall's corn had come in at 14.2% against a county average of 11.8%. Clyde Tibbetts said the moisture had not been in the corn. The moisture had been in the ground. Carl Bredal wrote the answer down on his clipboard and did not understand it for another 4 years. He paid Clyde Tibbetts the premium for Grade 1 grain, and the loading dock men loaded the F-100 in silence. In 1980, Dale Brockenshaw, who was now 51 and chairman of the co-op for the 12th straight term, pulled into Clyde Tibbetts's gravel drive on a Tuesday afternoon and asked him over the open window of his pickup what he was doing different. Clyde said he was leaving the stubble standing. Dale laughed once quietly and drove off, and did not come back for another 9 years. In 1983, a young agricultural reporter from a Des Moines farm magazine called The Farmhouse on a Saturday evening and asked Clyde for a phone interview. Clyde said he did not give phone interviews. The reporter asked again 3 weeks later. Clyde said the same thing. The reporter wrote a 600-word piece anyway off the elevator records and called Clyde the Arden County Stubble Man. And the piece ran in the December 1983 issue beside an advertisement for a 1984 Massey Ferguson combine. Clyde never read it. His son Ted Tibbetts, who was 38 in 1983 and farming his own 160 acres on County Road 9 the conventional way, read it twice and put the magazine in a kitchen drawer in his own house and did not mention it to his father for another 14 years. In the spring of 1989, a 3-day windstorm came across central Illinois on the back of a cold front and lifted somewhere on the order of 1.5 inches of topsoil off the plowed under fields of Arden County. The Federal Conservation Reserve Program had opened the previous year, and the office in Cooperton was busy through April. At the Arden County Fair on the second Saturday of August, 1989, in the late afternoon light by the hog barn, Dale Brockenshaw stood in line at the Federal CRP enrollment booth in his green John Deere polo and tan slacks and brown Oxford shoes with his application clipped to a clipboard. He had lost so much topsoil to the spring wind that the federal cost share was the only way he could keep the bank off his back. He was 60 years old. The line was long. He looked across the fairground and he saw Clyde Tibbetts walking past the 4-H pavilion with his grandson, and Dale Brockenshaw turned away. If this story is finding you tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps stories like this find the men who still know what waiting looks like. In late October of 1991, 2 years after the fairground, a state agricultural inspector from the Illinois Department of Agriculture pulled up the long gravel drive of Clyde Tibbetts's farmhouse in a white Ford Bronco with a 30-inch hand soil core sampler in the back. The inspector was 34 years old. His name was on a clipboard Clyde never read. The state had been running a soil survey grid through Arden County since 1986, and the back 40 of Clyde Tibbetts's farm had come up in the rotation that fall. The inspector walked the back 40 with Clyde at his elbow. The sun was at the angle the sun is at in Illinois in late October, low and pale, and the 8-inch standing wheat stubble of that year's crop ran east to the fence line in even gold rows. The inspector chose a sample point 47 paces in from the western fence. He set the foot plate of the sampler down, and he leaned on the T-handle with his full body weight, and the steel tube went 30 inches into the ground in 2 slow pushes. He pulled the core. He laid it on a clean white sheet. He took a steel rule out of his coat pocket, and he measured. The dark brown topsoil layer came in at 19 inches. The inspector looked up. He cleared his throat. He said the 1968 baseline survey, which the state had on file in the Cooperton Extension Office, had measured the topsoil on this same back 40 at 11 inches in October of 1968. He said he had never personally measured a field that had thickened by 8 inches in 23 years. He said the field next door, Dale Brockenshaw's South 80, had measured 4 inches that morning. He said it twice. He asked Clyde if he had hauled in compost. Clyde Tibbetts stood at the edge of the white sheet with the folded 1948 USDA pamphlet in his coat pocket, and he looked down at the soil core, and he said nothing for a long count of seconds. The wind moved the standing stalks, and they made the dry sound dry stalks make. Clyde Tibbetts did not haul in compost. Clyde Tibbetts had not bought a bag of fertilizer for his back 40 since 1971. Clyde Tibbetts had let the stubble stand for 23 winters, and the stubble had held the snow, and the snow had melted into the ground, and the worms had pulled the residue down into the dirt, and the residue had become dirt, and the dirt had become 19 inches of dark, crumbly topsoil with visible earthworm casts on the surface that no plow had broken in 23 years. Clyde Tibbetts thanked the inspector. He shook his hand. He did not invite him into the kitchen for coffee. He walked back to the barn alone with the folded pamphlet in his coat pocket, and he sat on the workbench in the half-dark for an hour, and he read the back-end paper one more time. Stubble, standing through winter, is topsoil saved through April. Asa Tibbetts, March 1949. The pencil was faint by then. The ink of the printed pamphlet was faint, too. The barn smelled of axle grease and cold straw. He did not tell anyone. He did not tell his wife. He did not tell his son. He drove the F-100 back out the next morning at first light, and he ran a disc through the standing stubble of his front 80 to plant winter wheat for the 1992 crop, and he left the back 40 standing again, the way he had left it standing every winter since 1968. The 1990s came and the 1990s went. Dale Brockenshaw enrolled 240 of his 600 acres into CRP in 1992, and he received federal cost share payments of approximately $52 per acre per year for 10 years, which kept the bank off his back, but which produced no grain and no income beyond the payment. And at the end of the 10-year contract in 2002, the topsoil on the CRP ground had recovered by 1.4 inches, which was a fraction of what Clyde Tibbetts' stubble had built in the same period without any government program at all. In 1997, a young extension agent from the University of Illinois drove down County Road 14 in a green state-issued sedan and asked Clyde if he could write a paper on the back 40. Clyde said he could write whatever he wanted. The extension agent measured the topsoil at 21 inches. He measured the soil organic matter at 6.8%, against a county average of 2.9%. He measured the moisture-holding capacity at 2.4 inches per foot of soil, against a county average of 1.1 inches per foot. He published a 14-page paper in the spring 1998 issue of the Illinois Soil and Water Bulletin titled "A 40-Acre Anomaly in Arden County," and it did not name Clyde Tibbetts, and it referred to him only as the operator. And Clyde read it twice in his kitchen and folded it and put it in the same drawer as the 1948 pamphlet, and he never spoke of it again. In the summer of 2002, his wife Mabel died of a stroke at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. She was 73 years old. She had been on the farm since 1949. She had typed every elevator receipt and every fertilizer invoice and every pencil-corrected ledger of Clyde Tibbetts' farming life into a black, canvas-bound farm account book that ran from 1955 to 2001, with not one entry missing. The book was on the kitchen shelf above the kerosene lamp. Clyde Tibbetts buried her in the Arden County Memorial Cemetery on a hot Tuesday afternoon, and he came home in the F-100, and he walked the back 40 in his black funeral suit and his black dress shoes, and he did not change out of the suit until the sun went down. The standing stubble brushed his pant legs. He came back to the kitchen in the dark, and he sat at the table where she had died, and he ate nothing, and he slept in the chair until first light. For the next 22 years, he kept the account book the way she had kept it. He used the same brand of black ledger and the same black pen. The 2003 column carried her last hand for the first 3 lines, and his hand for the rest. He never crossed her hand out, and he never copied it over. He was 98 years old when he stopped getting up at 4:30. That was 2024. We are getting ahead of the story. In the autumn of 1999, a soft rock disc plant rig out of Ohio that could cut residue at twice the speed of Clyde Tibbetts' 1969 disc came to market for $34,000. 3 farmers in Arden County bought one that fall on operating notes. Clyde Tibbetts did not. He kept the John Deere 4020 with the worn-down disc blades because the 4020 was the rig he had used in 1969 and the rig his father had used in 1952, and he was not in a hurry. He had never been in a hurry. The hurry was the thing the back 40 had been quietly correcting for 31 years. In the spring of 2003, Dale Brockenshaw retired as co-op chairman after 36 years. He was 74 years old. The new chairman was a 38-year-old grain broker named Hollis Pickard from a farm 5 miles east. The vote that October was the same vote it had always been: burn in or plow under. 68 men voted. Clyde Tibbetts, 99 votes into the count of his 99-year life on this ground, stood at the back row again and again did not raise his hand. The new chairman did not laugh. The new chairman recorded the abstention without comment. The men around Clyde looked at him a different way now. Some of them had been reading the 1998 bulletin paper. Some of them had been driving past the back 40 all summer. Nobody said anything. In October of 2009, year 41 of the standing stubble on Clyde Tibbetts' back 40, the annual co-op meeting ran the same vote one more time. Clyde Tibbetts was 105 years old by the calendar, but the calendar was wrong. He was 64 in 1968, and he was 64 in his bones every October he walked into the co-op hall. And on the night of the 2009 vote, he walked in with the same folded 1948 pamphlet in his right hand, and he sat in the same back row. After the vote, the hall emptied onto the porch. The October air carried the smell of cold straw and diesel. Dale Brockenshaw, now 79, was on the porch in his canvas barn coat with his hat in his hand. His own farm had been sold the previous March to a corporate operator out of Bloomington. He had moved into a small ranch house in Cooperton with his wife. He had walked over to the co-op meeting that night because he had been walking over to the co-op meeting every October for 51 years, and he did not know how to stop. Clyde Tibbetts stood on the porch step. A neighbor of his, named Wendell Threadgill, who was 54 years old and 10 years younger than Clyde had been on the night of the first abstention, came up the porch step beside him. Wendell Threadgill had farmed 320 acres on County Road 18 for 31 years. He had read the 1998 bulletin paper twice. He had driven past the back 40 for 15 straight summers. He had voted plow under every fall of his life. He stood next to Clyde Tibbetts on the porch, and he asked the question plainly, in front of 9 other men. "How did you double your topsoil, Mr. Tibbetts?" Clyde Tibbetts looked at him in the late autumn afternoon light. He held the folded pamphlet against the side of his leg. He spoke once. "I let it stand." Wendell Threadgill nodded. The men around him nodded. No one said anything else. The porch was quiet for a long count. Then Dale Brockenshaw came up the step. He took his hat off. He held it in both hands. His combed brown hair had gone fully gray under the brim. The dark wool sport coat of 40 years ago was a faded canvas barn coat now, and it was buttoned at the chest, and his trousers were dark, and his Oxford shoes were brown and scuffed. He looked Clyde Tibbetts in the face for the first time in 41 years, and he said the only thing he could say, "I had it wrong, Clyde. I plowed mine under for 40 years, and I have less to leave my grandson now than I had to start with." Clyde Tibbetts looked at him a long count. The October sun was low and cold on the porch. He nodded once. He did not say anything in return. He stepped down off the porch, and he walked to the F-100, and he drove the 3 miles home with the folded pamphlet on the bench seat beside him. He died in the upstairs bedroom of the farmhouse on the morning of February 14th, 2024, at 119 years old, which was longer than any man had a right to live, and which the obituary in the Cooperton Tribune corrected to a more believable 99. Whichever number you wanted to write down, he died in the bed his father had died in the house his father had built in 1922, on the farm whose back 40 had not been plowed in 55 years. The pamphlet was on the night table beside him. The funeral was on the 18th. His grandson Wesley Tibbetts, who was 32 years old in 2024 and had grown up in Indianapolis and had come back to the farm only on summer holidays as a boy, took the deed and the keys and the pamphlet that spring. Wesley was a lean-built man in a faded canvas jacket and a chambray shirt and Wranglers and brown work boots fully covering his ankles. He did not know how to disc plant. He did not know how to read a soil report. He did not know what 19 inches of topsoil felt like under a boot. He learned. He read the pamphlet on the porch in March of 2024 by lamplight at the kitchen table. He read the back end paper. He read the pencil note Asa Tibbetts had written in 1949, and Clyde Tibbetts had reread for 56 years. Stubble standing through winter is topsoil saved through April. He read Mabel's 47-year run of farm account books cover to cover by the same lamplight. He read the small, greasy pocket notebook with the red rubber band that had been in his grandfather's chest pocket every day for 56 years and which carried 2,300 pencil entries, drift counts, soil cores, residue depths, planting dates, and one line in March of 1969 that said only, "Pamphlet pages 6 to 7, stalks slow the wind." He read the 1998 Illinois Soil and Water Bulletin paper twice. He read the inspector's 1991 report. He took the John Deere 4020, the same 4020 that had cut the first pass through the standing residue in April of 1969 and which had been kept running by the same hands for 55 years. And he learned the disc plant the way a man learns it the first spring of his farming life, which is slowly and at considerable cost in diesel. In late September of 2024, Wesley Tibbetts walked the back 40 at golden hour with a borrowed 30-inch soil core sampler in his right hand and the 1948 pamphlet open in his left. The standing winter wheat stubble of the 56th uninterrupted year ran east to the fence line in 8-inch even gold rows. He set the footplate down 47 paces in from the western fence, the same point the inspector had cored in 1991. He leaned on the T-handle. The tube went 30 inches into the ground in 2 slow pushes. He pulled the core. He laid it on a clean white sheet on the hood of the F-100, which was the same 1962 Ford F-100 his grandfather had driven to the 1968 co-op meeting, and which had been kept running by the same hands for 62 years. He measured. The dark brown topsoil layer came in at 22 inches. If you have ever stood at a fence line counting what your neighbors plowed under, subscribe to the Old Man's Field. We tell these stories because some soil only thickens when nobody is watching it grow. Wesley Tibbetts stood at the fence line in the golden afternoon light. He looked at the core. He looked at the standing stubble. He looked at the pamphlet in his hand. He folded the pamphlet once, and he put it in his coat pocket, the way his grandfather had carried it for 56 years, and his great-grandfather had carried it for 4 years before that. He walked back to the F-100 in the slow, even step of a young man who has just understood what he is going to do for the rest of his life. The stubble stood through that winter. The snow caught in the 8-inch rows the way it had caught for 56 winters. The wind came down from the northwest, and it moved over the top of the stalks, and it did not touch the soil. In April of 2025, the worms pulled the residue down into the dirt, and the residue began to become dirt, and the dirt began to become 23 inches of dark, crumbly topsoil with visible earthworm casts on the surface. The 1948 pamphlet is on the kitchen shelf in the farmhouse on County Road 14 in Arden County, Illinois. The pencil note on the back-end paper is fading. The note has not changed. The note will not change. The back 40 has not been plowed in 56 years, and it will not be plowed in the lifetime of Wesley Tibbetts, and it will not be plowed in the lifetime of the son Wesley Tibbetts does not yet have. Some knowledge doesn't get louder when the world doubts it, it just waits.